To succeed and thrive at C-suite level, you need strategic clarity and operational excellence. Hello, and welcome to the C-Suite Framework podcast with me, Jennifer Geary. The topic of today's podcast is sustainability. And I am very proud that when I launched my first book in 2017 on the role of the COO, I put a whole chapter in, even back then, on sustainability, what it was, why it mattered to the COO, frameworks to follow, questions to ask, warning signs, and how to go from good to great. And in fact, that path followed through all the subsequent books as well. So in case you think, oh, I'm not a CSO, this doesn't apply to me, you couldn't be more wrong. Whatever the role is that you occupy in the C-suite, I guarantee that it has or should have or needs to have an impact on and be impacted by sustainability. In the Chief Risk Officer book, I went through a pyramid of risks, but I then said sustainability is the most fundamental risk of all, and here's how you need to tackle it as a CRO. And in the Chief People Officer book, Anne talked a lot about how often a lot of people and sustainability related drives can emanate from and take place in or be led by the Chief People Officer and the HR function. So whatever area that you work in, whatever role you aspire to, you need to understand sustainability and what it means to you and how it impacts your role. So I'm going to be joined by Anna Krotova, my co-author for How to Be a Chief Sustainability Officer. And you will hear from her yourself as to how she thinks about the role, how she came to the role, how to go about structuring it, and how to make it a success. It's a really good chat by a very principled and dynamic and passionate speaker. Let's go and hear from Anna Krotova now. I am delighted to be joined today by my co-author in How to Be a Chief Sustainability Officer, Anna Krotova. Anna is a sustainability director and a pioneer in sustainability. She's been working in the field since 2010, advocating for transparent and responsible business practices rooted in respect for planetary boundaries and human rights. In her roles at the International Finance Corporation, Metabolic, Geary, and private sector companies, Anna has helped organizations improve their sustainability practices, usher in impactive changes in company operations and culture, and encourage meaningful reflection around sustainability issues. Anna holds an MA in Environmental Policy from Moscow State University and an MSc in Industrial Ecology from Delft University of Technology, and she serves in various capacities across the sustainability community. Anna lives in Amsterdam with her husband and 2 children. Anna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jenny.
So you and I have been on other podcasts together. I did interview you as part of our book launch. A little known fact is that we have not yet actually physically been in the same room. So we only know how to interact on camera like this, although we're going to fix that shortly. But this is the first time we've done it this way. This is the first time I've interviewed you in this way.
Glad to be a guest. Exciting.
So some people might not know the story. Let's just do that quickly from your perspective, how this idea came about, because you approached me, but tell our listeners about how that happened.
Sure. So I was working in sustainability, as you said, for quite a long time. And there were things that I were seeing that I didn't like where they were going. And in addition, I also sort of collected a bit of experience that I wanted to just synthesize in a guidance, I guess, for people in similar roles. And so I had the idea of writing a book for quite a long time, but then I always had full-time jobs, so I never had the kind of the space. And then we met, you and I, at an event in my former company where I used to work. And I sort of read about what else do you do? And I read that you write these books. The first one being Chief Operating Officer, which I bought and basically gulped over the weekend because it resonated so much with me in terms of how it was written and what you were saying there, and that you were speaking from a point of view of a real practitioner, someone who's been in these shoes. And so I thought, I wish there was a book like that for sustainability practitioners. But then time passed, and all of a sudden, I think this was maybe 6 months later or so, I saw a post on LinkedIn that you are releasing your third book, but in collaboration with Anne Keeley, How to Be a Chief People Officer. So I realized, oh, hang on a second. So you've wrote these 2 books where you had the actual role, and now you're starting collaborations with people in these roles, in these C-suite roles, to continue sort of expanding your menu of books. And I thought, okay, well, this is the moment. There's some other sort of things happening in my life that I guess everything sort of combined. It was the right moment. So I approached you on LinkedIn and I said, hey, so what do you think? And you said, why not? I'm not sure what kind of thoughts were running through your head at that moment, because we literally had like I think I was moderating a panel that you were on. And again, it was during COVID, so it was virtual. Yeah. And then a year later, we had the book.
And I think we had one person in common, and we should give a shout out to Bronwyn Boyle, because Bronwyn said, oh, Anna's amazing. And maybe she said to you, oh, Jenny's amazing. I don't know. But there was a little bit of comfort, I suppose, in that we had that mutual contact. But I mean, it seems so obvious now, but it really was a leap of faith on both of our sides, I think, to jump in together with someone that we didn't know all that well, but trust in the process and trust in the alignment of our views. And of course, the result is the book, which we're thrilled about. You touched a little on it just before we came on, but I would like to unpack a bit more. You said, things happen at a certain point of time and everything aligns, but the sustainability industry is going through a very, very hard time at the moment. CSOs are having a very hard time at the moment. Just unpack a little why you wanted to write this book now, why it felt important and timely.
So around 2018, things started shifting dramatically in sustainability, right? So sustainability as a movement, as a topic, as a discipline exists much, much longer from the 60s. And if you want to sort of go even back further to sort of hunter-gatherer times, but really the corporate sustainability function is relatively new. And for a long time, it really served as sort of an addendum to the marketing and HR departments. It wasn't really delivering those strategic insights for the business to help understand, are we resilient? Are we fit for purpose? Are we managing our impacts? And that has all shifted in 2018. There are a lot of things that led to that, which we cover in the book in detail. But in summary, there is a lot of regulation released to finally transition sustainability from soft law to hard law, introducing a lot of requirements for companies to really start measuring and addressing their impacts with real legal repercussions connected for non-compliance and for inaction. It was a bit of a perfect storm between what investors wanted companies to address, regulations that responded to that, hyper-transparency, in which it has become very sort of clear for civil society how companies are negatively impacting, their well-being and the planet. There was sort of that technology that created this unprecedented transparency. I mean, right now you can literally look through a satellite technology into an area and see that it's deforested and then track that back through supply chains to the company. So all of that created that evolution of corporate sustainability and really graduated it from, where it was, which was somewhere tucked at the back of the corporate floor, producing sort of some nice success stories, to actually that strategic input and operating really at the intersection of legal, strategy, and finance. And that also has extended a lot the number of people that we needed to invite to these positions to help companies do this work. And companies started looking at hiring talent internally. And I realized that, there will be now two groups of people, one who come internally from the business to do these roles, but who are entirely new to the sustainability domain, right? So they have worked in a business for some time, they know the organization, they're a business expert, but the breadth of sustainability and what it actually means for their business is entirely new. And then there would be the other group, which are sustainability experts who would be recruited en masse to companies, but they wouldn't know how the company actually works. So these would be people coming from perhaps NGOs, maybe consultants, but still, people who are a little bit sort of removed from the corporate world and need a bit of an understanding how to actually navigate that well in a way that is effective and sort of pragmatic. Because a lot of the time, and these are people like me who feel very passionately about the topic, but there's a certain sort of dynamic to this role inside the corporate that you need to sort of respect, and certain boundaries and certain just nuances. And so I wanted to bring all of that together in a book to give basically a guideline for both of these groups of people and how to do this role successfully.
There's a real parallel in the way you talk about the CSO role and the way I felt about the COO role when I first set out to write the book, because it's not always a well understood role. The CSO role in particular is still quite a young and evolving role. It's probably different in very many organizations, and it can be quite a lonely role and sometimes up to the individual to define it and to put a framework on it. And we would never claim that what we've put is absolutely, there's only one type of CSO and it's definitely this. But what we are putting out there is a framework, at least, for the CSO to interrogate and say, is this me? Am I doing that? Am I responsible for this? Is it more than, hopefully it's more than reporting, but something that at least you can kind of grapple with and get your teeth into, and then say, okay, this is my expression of that role in this particular organization and in this particular context. So interesting parallels there.
And if I could just sort of pick up on that, for CSOs or sustainability managers who are listening to the podcast or their organizations, what your CSO is doing right now is really charting and creating a new corporate function. They are creating new processes, they're creating new connections, they're bringing together people who often have disconnected interests. And that is a huge job. There's not really a blueprint for how to do it. We tried to give it in a book, but you have to understand that essentially your CSOs right now are building something from sort of scratch, from start. And that's a huge job, a huge mandate.
That's so right. And obviously we want this podcast and we want the book to be useful to CSOs, current and aspiring, but also any C-suite executive who is trying to grapple with what this function means, what their role is in it, how they can help, how they might inadvertently be hindering and not realize it, and also things like chief executive officers, board members who are trying to understand this role as well. So I think our hope is that it has much broader reach than just to the individual. So let's get into it a little bit. One of the things when we talked about, one of the things I think you liked about the book structure was we always start with culture. And we'll talk about strategy in a second as well, which might seem a little counterintuitive or fluffy or something like that for somebody coming in with a very real mandate around sustainability. But I'd love you to maybe just illustrate for people, maybe when you're deciding whether to take a job in the first place and looking at the culture of an organization, or when you're in role and you're thinking about, right, how do I exercise this mandate? Talk to me about how you think about culture and how culture impacts that.
Yeah, so there's lots of books written about culture, right? And colloquially, it's we refer to it as how we do things around here. So that's the norms, the behaviors, the values that sit in the organization. And even with the best strategy in place, culture is ultimately the one element or factor that will undermine or support the successful execution of your strategy. And so a weak culture or toxic culture is something that will be obviously a big hindrance. And so the cues that you need to look at or look for when you either enter or the organization or you're considering that is, there's a whole bunch of things, but just to name a few, the knowledge level of the organization. Do they relate sustainability to something as simple as recycling, which means you have to do some sort of education. You need to do some education and awareness raising, because obviously it's much more complex than just that. You need to look at, do people generally care about the success of the business? Are they proactive at taking initiative? Because you will be starting a lot of sort of projects across the entire organization. Some of them could be seen as something, on the side or next to primary job responsibilities, but people have to feel that ownership for the success of the organization to sort of jump on these projects with you. You have to look at generally how empowered people feel to speak up, to bring issues, because you will be falling back on people to help you source, what's going wrong in the organization that you need to be sort of addressing from a sustainability perspective. Do people feel safe to fail, for example? At a company where I work right now, we had a project that took us 3 years to execute, and it was through, trial and error, but we knew we could do that. So we felt sort of safe trying things out. So there's all of these things that you need to be aware of. And sadly, not all companies have an empowered and strong culture, right? Some organizations are dysfunctional. I think you're right about that very well in your other book. And organizations that are sort of working against themselves. If that's the case, then you have to find allies across the board, among investors, among management, among C-suite, among employees, to help you drive that agenda forward and plant these seeds together with you. So culture undoubtedly is paramount, and you have to diagnose it and invest in building a sustainability culture when you join.
I think at a very minimum, you have to understand it so that you can execute successfully in the role. But actually, there are probably some cultures and some organizational situations in which you might just decide as a CSO, you know what, I don't want a part of this. This can't succeed. It's not set up to succeed. And I think that's a really tough question for a CSO to ask themselves. But let's link that through then to strategy. And this is the other big upfront pillar that we tackle head on. Because as you've said, there can be organizations where sustainability is a glossy brochure, where it's a marketing exercise. And I think people will know where we're going to go with this in terms of the interlinking of strategy. But let's hear from you in terms of how you look at strategy and sustainability alongside each other.
Yeah, so there is a process that companies need to go through, sort of a curve to get to that strategy. And I see strategy really as innovating and rethinking your business models and your operating models. And that's what kind of strategy is about. To get there, you need to first understand, how does sustainability even relate to your organization, right? So what does your organization do? How does it create value? Does its business model harm society, or does it constructively serve society? Do you rely a lot on raw materials, on labor, on both, right? So understand how sustainability falls in place. The answer also might be, well, not so much. And that's also something that you need to be sort of prepared to respond to and act upon, and perhaps, walk away or commit to and see what improvements you can bring. Once you've done that, you have to understand where you are in terms of your risks and opportunities, right? So that's the double materiality assessment that really is the foundational work to understand the status quo and where you're really starting off. And then sort of you get to the strategy process where, with those insights, the strategic insights in place, you can start thinking, okay, well, where do we go from here? However, that's kind of the textbook blueprint. There's much deeper reflection that needs to happen that many professionals are unfortunately unaware, and why good strategies sort of get stuck or don't reach their full potential. And what I mean is that you really need to assess a few things. You really need to understand your organization, right? So actually, what is the market that it operates in? What does it compete on? Is it price? Is it quality? Is it service? Is it functionality? For example, if you are in a mass market where you really need to keep prices low, it might be very difficult for you to introduce premiums for sustainability products, which could cost just more because you're using more expensive raw materials, you're investing in sort of new production processes. So you need to sort of get a return on that somehow. You need to understand your investors. What is their time horizon? Are they prepared to invest in initiatives that may only show return 7-10 years down the line? Privately owned companies and family businesses, they operate very differently from publicly listed companies. You need to also understand the sustainability maturity of the company. So again, you might have this kind of 100 points plan in your strategy, but actually you might be the first hire in your organization and you have nothing in place. So your first year will just be spent on building these foundations before you even get to that deep, fun, and complex work of strategy development. You also need to correct for regional context and nuances, right? So what works in headquarters might not at all work and just not be relatable to elsewhere, because the policy landscape is different. The sentiment from employees and from consumers could be different. There might be different, financial incentives. So developed markets work very differently to emerging markets. And then, of course, you have to prioritize, right? So again, you have to realize how much change your organization is ready to effect at this very moment, because it might be in crisis. It might be working to save itself. It might be investing everything into building a particular, product or branch, right? So what is happening in the organization for you to come in and really tailor your strategy in a way that really sticks and is just not left to sort of sitting in some document, but is really embedded in the business. So of course, there are, lots of work has been done in terms of how you develop strategy and what it is about, but it's really these deeper waters where you need to sort of look, and that are not sort of written, I think, or I haven't sort of seen being written elsewhere, that you need to understand, and they're currently acting as a bit of blockers for CSOs.
That is just so beautifully illustrated, Anna, because in case anyone was in any doubt, what you are talking about here is long-term, sustainable business success, going to the very core of what the organization does. It couldn't be further away from, we recycle our coffee cups and we've switched from plastic to paper packaging. Obviously, those are parts of an overall piece. But this is looking at the very essence of what the organization does and getting into everything. And maybe that double materiality piece is just worth, for the sake of full clarity, just sort of talking about, because you're not just talking about the sort of internal view of the organization, you're talking about the outward expression of the communities, the customers, the people it impacts in every step in its value chain. Do you want to just double click on double materiality for 1 second?
Yeah, so double materiality is really the foundational step that any company needs to do before it starts any sustainability work. And it's really about understanding how do you impact the world through your products and services and your operating models, and what risks that creates to you and what opportunities that can create for you to mitigate those impacts and actually create positive impacts. It's a concept that was obviously brought to corporate sustainability from financial reporting, which has been obviously adopted and is now really formalized with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, at least here in the EU. And it's basically built on the notion that we live in a physical world, and everything and organizations are open systems that constantly interact with their physical environment and society, and have either negative or positive impacts on that. And so understanding what those are at first, and then adding basically ranking them in terms of their risk sort of profile. That's what double materiality is all about. And it's a concept that is formalized in CSRD, but it is still increasing in sort of complexity and specificity. And also it still has some sort of gaps that are left for CSOs to interpret, especially to interpret with their auditor when they get to the audit stage. But it's certainly one thing that every CSO should understand, upskill on, and get that methodology right, because ultimately it will help you address the right things rather than perhaps spending a lot of energy and corporate resources on things that don't really matter at all in the long run.
And actually that segues us really well into the middle section of the book, when we get into the detail and the real meat in the sandwich of what the sustainability role entails, because a lot of CSOs or sustainability professionals come into a role and find they just get drowned in reporting. And clearly reporting is a really important aspect of the role, and we'll talk about that. But in this middle section, and I'm just going to kind of read out the path that you take. So you start with a materiality assessment. You then go into managing impacts. Then we talk about things like policies, risk management. And then there's this kind of outward facing investor relations, reporting, comms and marketing piece. But just talk a little about why you chose those headings, why you did it in that order, starting with that materiality and impacts, and how you think about that in the round.
So if we take a step back and think, why do organizations do all of this at all? It is to mitigate their impacts and increase their resilience in a world that is in constant change, right? And there is a path to that, and you can't leapfrog from sort of to that big impactful piece before you do that, go through those stages that we describe in the book. So as you said, it starts with a materiality assessment. Then you need to understand what actually is the menu of impacts that exists there. There are environmental, social, and governance impacts. There's about 30 of them, and they keep also evolving. New impacts keep popping up and being sort of formalized in different standards. So a CSO needs to, at least at a kind of general high-level view, understand what all of them are. So we give a toolkit of, a short description of each impact. Because again, when I say climate change, you might understand something, or when I say biodiversity, which is a huge topic, someone else might understand something differently. So we need that kind of baseline to know, where we're all at. So then you go to policy development, which is about setting that governance to protect the organization and to establish the right kind of processes and behaviors around a particular impact that the organization causes or wants to mitigate against. And sort of you and I think debated a lot on that chapter, whether, how helpful policies really are, but it is simply right now a requirement to have one, and there's kind of no avoiding it. Obviously, your ethics in the organization is a separate question in terms of how conducive it is for that policy to actually do what it was designed to do. And we touch about it in the book, but I think this was kind of my concern about this chapter. Anyway, and then of course you have investors, right, who ultimately want to understand how are you managing sort of downside risk and creating upside value, because these are the people to whom you are actually, or the management is ultimately sort of responsible for, right? So everything that you're doing with sustainability, you are doing I want to say to sort of serve their serve their interests. That doesn't sound really right, but ultimately it's their kind of money that you're managing, right? So that all kind of needs to fit together. And then there's the end of that pipe, which is, okay, the reporting on what you've done, on the impacts, and then communicating that out to the world, and communicating not just sort of the results of your report, but obviously in general, how do you want to use communications as a leverage to change the narrative? So for example, I currently work in the food industry. I mean, there's lots we can do through communications to change how people think about food, what we eat, and reflecting that in our assortment, right? So that's kind of, it starts with, okay, understand where you are, build governance around that, and then report and communicate outwards.
And that upfront piece on materiality and impact, it's so necessary because it's your safeguard against going off in the wrong direction or allocating resources to the wrong thing, or being accused of greenwashing because you've sort of drawn attention to some, project over here that ultimately it looks great, but it doesn't have all that much impact, versus actually looking at the core harms that your organization necessarily does that need to be mitigated and abated.
Exactly. It's kind of like avoiding to sort of open the wrong door in the dark, and really knowing, okay, which direction you need to go there.
This podcast is brought to you by the best-selling How to Be A range of books. These books, authored by me, Jennifer Geary, in collaboration with other seasoned experts, break down roles such as the COO, Chief Risk Officer, Chief People Officer, and Chief Sustainability Officer into their component parts. They explain the technical capabilities you need, but also how to operate at this level, preparing yourself, getting to know your peers, engaging with culture, strategy, building your team, and much more. Over 30,000 books have been sold, and the books have received overwhelmingly positive reviews. There's even a book about the role of AI called The Augmented COO. Check out the books, available on Amazon and Waterstones now. There was a couple of areas where you and I had a bit of back and forth. And one was on the one about doing good versus not doing harm. And I came to this with the view that it's great to have, a positive campaign of good things that you're doing, money that you donate to good causes, projects, good corporate social responsibility. And I think we got there in the middle, but your strong view, and I guess this is born out of experience of seeing companies greenwash or do things too much, is you have got to minimize the harm before you think about the positive. Have I characterized that correctly?
That's correctly. And to illustrate it very simply, with all the pledges that have been made around transitioning to net zero and so forth, there's one number globally that I wanted to see go down, and that's, the volume of emissions that we emit every year. Carbon dioxide, of course, and that number keeps going up. So that's why before we get that piece right, before we address the negative impacts, we can't move to the conversation about positive impacts. And of course, when you address a negative impact, when you mitigate it, you are obviously creating positive consequences around that, right? But the conversation has to start with do no harm first. And then once you've really sorted that out, then you can actually move to spending your time and your energy to create these other positive sort of standalone positive sort of impact projects that deliver positive impact. Sorry, I got my tongue twisted there. But unfortunately, the reality is just we still have the sixth mass extinction. We have a lot of human rights violations. I mean, dig into any big retailer supply chain. We have climate change that is just getting worse, and worse. So I don't yet see us doing well on that kind of first piece.
Let's move into a couple of other aspects of it. So let's talk about teams. So sometimes, depending on your role, you may come in and you may be the only person with anything to do with sustainability in their role. Sometimes you may have a team around you. Talk to us about how you go about building a team. And I'm going to say both an actual team, if you have that luxury, or a virtual team where you have to be more resourceful and just leverage talent in the organization.
Yes. I mean, ideally, you want to have, and again, this depends on obviously the size and the sector of your organization and your material topics. I know large multinationals who have sustainability teams of 60 people. Equally, I know those who have teams of 3 and 4, and they're doing fine. They're managing that way, but they have accountability set for sustainability throughout their organization. So the function is now very fluid in terms of business experts are coming into it and assuming certain responsibilities for sustainability topics, as well as subject matter sort of sustainability experts are coming in to do the work. So some companies are meeting each other sort of in between. Some are creating these big sustainability teams. So you have to look at what's material to you and who do you need. You have to sometimes fight for the budget for your team to do these hires, to hire the people that you need.
For people who might be listening in who are looking at a career in sustainability, maybe earlier on in their career, talk about some of the skill sets that you highly value. I'm thinking of things like data, analytics, understanding, but you know, if you think about some of those really discrete hard skills, and there's also a whole bunch of soft skills and things as well, but what are some of the hard skills that you look for first that you need to support you in your role?
Really, the profession is becoming really fluid, and one of the experts we interviewed for the book, which was a vice president of sustainability in a large company in North America, they said that we need more business experts from IT, from procurement, from real estate, from finance, who are upskilled in sustainability versus kind of that mentality which has persisted in corporate sustainability for some time, us against them, right? So really the sustainability specialists, they know what to do and they wouldn't let sort of anyone in. And I've seen that quite a lot, and that didn't really work. And it's not going to work with how the mandate is extending and how it's professionalizing and institutionalizing and becoming regulated. So if you are a business expert, you want to see what skill sets that you have are transferable to sustainability and could be helpful in sustainability. So for example, if you're coming from finance or audit, obviously your knowledge of internal controls and the audit process, that is going to be very helpful in ensuring that your sustainability reporting, which is an absolute must, meets that same quality. If you are coming from operations and your organization is dealing with supply chain issues, your knowledge of actually how that whole system works is very good. If you are a company who wants to transition to new, better materials, you might want to hire someone from engineering or from material science or chemist. It really depends on the material topics that you're addressing. And then if you are someone who is starting off in this function or starting off at all in sustainability, right, and is thinking of sort of becoming CSO down the line, what you really need to think is, do you want to be a generalist in this topic, or is there a particular niche or a particular topic sort of that you are interested in and that you want to specialize? Because sustainability is broad. You have human rights, you have food, you have supply chain, there's textiles. I mean, there's just so much that you could focus on. And in the book, we discuss the benefits and the sort of pros and cons of both pathways. So think about, is there a particular challenge that you want to address? And then sort of focus on that, because that will obviously determine, the education that you choose, the kind of the networks you will be working in. So think carefully, what is it that you want to sort of help solve?
I trained as a chartered accountant at the beginning, and I could absolutely see that if I was starting out again now, I would possibly go as sort of a twin financial and, sustainability reporting discipline. If that, I'm sure that must exist. And because, as you say, the parallels of assurance, audit, testing, tracing every number through, from the front line into the accounts, sort of Sarbanes-Oxley type controls, those two are very, very complementary. And also that risk mindset, right? That what can go wrong, understanding processes, dissecting things, when things go wrong, why they went wrong, fixing them. Those mindsets are so complementary. So I think for lots of people, there are pathways into sustainability, and there is either formally in terms of moving into that area, or also just in terms of collaboration. And that's only going to strengthen the overall movement. So it's a fertile ground. Listen, Anna, we're nearly getting to the end, but I wanted to ask you two final questions. The first one is, talk to us about where you see the sector going. So what trends are shaping it? What's coming? What's new? What do you see coming around the corner?
The biggest change that I expect to see in a couple of years is most organizations right now are at a point where they're collecting the data and understanding the status quo in terms of their impacts, risks, and opportunities. So things that we've started with at the beginning. And that requires a lot of data collection, that requires setting these data processes and data management systems. And that's causing a lot of sort of frustration and pain points right now in the community because many organizations just don't have that in order. even though voluntary sustainability reporting existed for many years. That's just a reality. But I'm convinced that we'll get from that point in a couple of years to a point where, data arrives on a silver platter to you and actually serves as that strategic insight to, to decisions that your business makes. I'm curious to see where we're going to go from there when we don't need to spend the time on that sort of foundation and building work and basic hygiene, but also when we will have much more transparency about our impacts and when we will be able to price the risks and opportunities much better. And the answer for some companies might be, well, the risks actually are not that expensive for us. And I'm not quite sure how we're going to be responding or how companies are going to be responding to that realization. So that is something that we've yet to see. So what I'm saying is it going to be a race, to the bottom or to the top once that transparency is actually there. We, of course, have the end of the Sustainable Development Goals in 5 years? So supposedly we would have reached them. But of course, we do know that sadly we are far from where we envisioned we would be with these goals, and keeping the enthusiasm, keeping the optimism for many people who are working in this field, who have dedicated their lives to this, and finding new language and new paradigms, I think, will be paramount, right? Because we've put a lot of work in this decade to create measurements, create the KPIs, but in that accounting piece, we have lost a bit of a big picture, I feel, and actually asking ourselves, well, are we actually doing things in a way that's fit for the future, even if we can measure everything sort of precisely? So I think that will be the next development. And then, of course, there's always, research popping up with new impacts that we're causing, with new methodologies. There's a lot to for CSOs to navigate in terms of the regulatory infrastructure that we've put in place, because it is just going to keep sort of spitting out new legislative acts that CSOs need to be really versed in and understand how they all sort of fall together and how they impact their organizations and actioning that with respective teams. So interesting times ahead.
Yeah, it feels, let me know if you agree with this, it feels like a time to stay the course. It's not maybe an easy time to work in sustainability. There's a backlash in some parts of the market against, these so-called woke ideas and that sort of thing. There are lots of things to distract and worry us out in the world, geopolitical events. And as you say, we're still wading through the tough job of just seeing through what we're doing and finding a way to account and price for it and explain it. And it feels like a time to build your network, to keep yourself strong and resilient, to keep going, and to trust that if we stay the course and make real change, not just report it, but actually make real change, that maybe it'll come full circle and we'll feel the benefit.
Yeah, and CSO is someone who is a pacemaker, right? It's you plant a lot of seeds, you watch them grow, and the value of this job is the patient application of the steps to get your organization through impact. And yes, there is a bit of a time lag and a gap in understanding of where sort of the organization is and understanding the mandate and the risks that come with that and the resources that a CSO or a person in that position needs. And the CSO who knows what they need and are lacking that and maybe are struggling to make the case for that. So there certainly is that lag, but everyone is learning and upskilling very quickly. It's not a topic that could be ignored. It's on everyone's really. It comes to an organization. It finds its way through different paths, whether that's investors or suppliers or NGOs. It's impossible to ignore. So I'm positive that once we spend a couple of years now with the regulation in place to really building good, solid kind of sustainability foundations, we'll be in a much more interesting position to actually leapfrog to something more meaningful and impactful.
That feels like excellent words of wisdom. Any final words of wisdom? What one thing would Anna Krotova say to younger Anna Krotova?
Stay calm and keep going, I suppose. I would say, you alluded to this, find your folks, right? Find your people. We are in all of this together. There's an incredible amount of willingness to help and to support, because all of us sort of peers, we are dealing with exactly the same things, plus minus, and people are very happy to support one each other emotionally, professionally, with tips, with just words of advice, and sometimes be a sounding board to listen to frustrations. So do reach out to people, find these networks, and take a break, take care of yourself. It's not your responsibility to solve all the kind of woes and the issues. Unfortunately, CSOs are now taking that hit and everything is falling into their place, and the profession is just really bloated. That will also change. I mean, we will find, I think some pieces of it will sort of transition to, departments like finance when it comes to reporting and so forth. So the CSO's mandate will balance out with time. So if you're feeling it's too much, take a break. It's not your responsibility, and just be sort of pragmatic and careful in how you build this new function in your organization and chart that sort of ground.
Anna, I want to pay tribute to you. You are a fierce and dedicated, passionate speaker for sustainability. You have an incredible work ethic. I can attest to that in terms of the books. And when people see you talk, your knowledge and depth and passion for the subject just come across. It was a joy working with you on this book. We had our moments, we won't lie, but we got there, and it was a joy, and it is a joy. And I know we couldn't be prouder of this book that we've created together. And we're going to be speaking shortly in London together as well. But I just want to thank you for everything that you do, and for being a great collaborator, and for coming on the podcast today. Thank you, Anna Krotova.
Thank you. Thanks for your trust, Jenny. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. For more information about the How to Be a books, the C-Suite Framework courses, the podcast, or to get in touch with me, head over to www.csuiteframework.com.